Welcome, dear listener, to Go to Sleep Historian. Tonight, we journey along a road older than memory. The Silk Road, where deserts once shimmered with golden caravans and the world first learned to connect. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and allow the whisper of time to guide you from the sands of ancient empires to the glowing threads of our modern world. Before we begin, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, we kindly ask you to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more calm, historic stories from the past to ease your mind, enrich your dreams, and gently guide you to rest. Now, settle in, dear traveler. Let the winds of the old world carry you as we follow the timeless path. From desert tracks to digital highways, the enduring Silk Road, the whisper of the desert. Breathe deeply, dear listener. Let the noise of the day fall away like dust from tired sandals. The night stretches wide above the earth, and the desert is waiting, ancient, endless, whispering still beneath the stars. Long before steel roads and glowing screens, before borders and treaties and printed maps, there was only this: the wind brushing the dunes, the moon rising pale over mountains, and a narrow track beaten smooth by the patient feet of travelers. It was not yet called the Silk Road. To those who walked it, it was simply the way. Listen, and you can almost hear them. The soft pad of camels, the quiet murmur of traders speaking in tongues that mingled like smoke. Bronze bells jingle faintly from the necks of beasts burdened with silk and spice. The air trembles with the scent of cinnamon, of sandalwood, of sweat and hope. Far to the east, in the cradle of the Han Dynasty, Emperor Wu sits upon his jade throne. He dreams of lands beyond the mountains, where horses run swift as storms and kingdoms shimmer with strange wonders. His envoy, Zhang Qian, is sent westward, not with an army, but with curiosity. He will vanish into the unknown for 13 long years, carried by wind and fate. When he returns, he brings not conquest, but connection. Through him, China learns of Persia and Parthia, of the golden lands beyond the Pamir. The thread is spun, the loom begins to turn, and history hums quietly to life. The first caravans follow. They travel through valleys where the rivers freeze to crystal and across deserts where the sand burns like fire beneath their feet. Silk is their treasure, light as breath, costly as gold. In Rome, noble women will one day drape it across their shoulders and whisper that it feels like water. In China, it will remain a guarded secret, spun only by those who know the mystery of the worm and the mulberry leaf. But the Silk Road was never only about silk. It was about longing the human hunger to see what lies beyond the horizon. Each merchant who left his home carried more than goods. He carried the question, what else is out there? Imagine standing upon a ridge at dawn. The light spills over the desert, soft and honey-colored. The caravan stirs below, shadows moving among tents. A pot clinking, a camel sighing. The leader, a man with lines deep as dried riverbeds across his face, raises his hand and speaks a blessing in a language older than any empire. May the wind be behind us, and the sand beneath us remember our steps. The journey begins. By day, they march in heat that bends the air. The world becomes a mirage of gold and white. The rhythm of the camel's pace becomes a heartbeat, steady and hypnotic. By night, the desert turns cold as glass. The stars bloom in silence, vast and uncountable, and around the small campfire the men trade stories of lands they've never seen. Cities of marble by the sea, jungles of spice and songbirds, palaces where the air smells of incense and jasmine. No one knows if these places are real, but in their telling, the road itself grows longer, richer, more alive. The Silk Road, even in its birth, was a tapestry woven by imagination as much as geography. Every path crossed another, through the Taklamakan Desert, the Pamir Mountains, the fertile valleys of Bactria, and the Persian plains that led to the Mediterranean. What began as a handful of brave travelers soon became a network stretching thousands of miles, linking kingdoms and cultures that had never before spoken one another's names. And what a strange beauty it was. Greek coins found in Chinese tombs, Persian glass in the ruins of Shanghai. Indian spices flavoring Roman feasts. Even in its earliest days, the Silk Road carried proof that humanity's greatest strength was its willingness to share. There were dangers, of course, storms that swallowed whole caravans, bandits hidden among the dunes, thirst that cracked lips and spirit alike. But the travelers learned. They carried water in goat skins, measured their path by stars, and trusted the instincts of their beasts more than maps. Wherever the desert offered mercy, a spring, a shadow of rock, a scattering of tamarisk trees, they built rest stops, and in time those stops became villages, then cities. Oasis after oasis bloomed. Like beads upon a string, Dunhuang, Turfan, each a heartbeat along the body of the road. In those cities, languages blended, coins from faraway lands clinked together in market stalls. A scholar from India might debate philosophy with a monk from China, while a Persian artisan carved stories into blue-glazed tile, and over them all, the scent of silk dye and hot bread floated through the air. Somewhere between trade and trust, between survival and song, something deeper began to grow. Ideas started traveling faster than caravans. Beliefs crossed borders that armies could not. A merchant might leave his home speaking only one faith's prayers and return years later with the teachings of another etched upon his heart. In this way, the Silk Road became not merely a path of commerce, but of communion. Yet even as it thrived, few who walked it understood the vastness of what they were building. To them, the road was only today's journey, the next mile, the next sunrise. But history sees it differently. From these scattered trails rose the first true global network, not of machines, but of minds. The Silk Road connected China's silk and paper to Rome's glass and silver, India's spices to Persia's wisdom, and beyond all trade. It connected people as amalgamations. Thousands of years later, when we speak of globalization, of trade routes and information networks, we are only naming what they first lived. Their footsteps are the blueprint of every modern road. Their courage, to leave the known and walk into the unknown, remains humanity. Oldest innovation, the desert size. Again, the caravan halts at a dune's edge. The men unfurl their prayer rugs. Faces turned toward whatever direction feels sacred tonight. The camels kneel, shadows folding upon shadows. A faint wind stirs the sand. The stars burn like 1,000 lanterns, each a memory of someone who dared to travel farther. In the hush that follows, the narrator's voice softens. The road began with a question, and every traveler who has ever crossed the earth, from the first merchant to the modern soul behind a glowing screen, walks still in search of its answer. The fire crackles low. The camels murmur. Far in the east, the faintest trace of dawn glows once more, gold upon the rim of the world. The Silk Road awakens, and the long story of connection begins. Threads of empire, the sun has risen fully now. The shadows stretch long over the dunes, and the caravan moves again, steady as breath. Each step forward is a step deeper into history, into the world that grew around this shimmering thread of trade and trust. The Silk Road was not one path, nor even one age. It was a tapestry, woven across centuries by the hands of empires. And like all great tapestries, it began with a single thread, drawn east to west, connecting distant hearts through the loom of ambition. Far to the east lies Chang'an, capital of the Han Dynasty, a city of red walls and tiled roofs, of bustling markets filled with lacquerware, jade. Here, the emperor sits behind silk curtains, his court glittering with scholars, soldiers, and merchants. He dreams of expansion, of a world that stretches far beyond his own borders. To the Han, the Silk Road was more than commerce. It was diplomacy. It was power. A bridge through which knowledge and influence could flow like the Yellow River itself. From Chang'an, the road winds west through the Hexi Corridor, where mountains rise like fortress walls. Watchtowers marked the way, smoke plumes signaling safety or danger. Beyond them lies the realm of the Parthians, the fierce horsemen of Persia, who guard their lands with equal parts pride and cunning. They are the middlemen of the ancient world, the keepers of secrets, the brokers of exchange. Between these two empires stretches an invisible hand of trade, shaking across deserts and mountains. To the west, the Roman Empire gleams like a coin held up to the sun. Its cities, Antioch, Tyre, Alexandria, thrum with life, marble streets echoing with the sound of sandals and the chatter of markets. Here, silk arrives like a miracle. No one knows where it comes from. Roman philosophers write of the seers, a distant people at the edge of the world who harvest silk from the leaves of trees. The mystery only deepens its allure. Senators and nobles drape themselves in shimmering robes, so fine they seem woven from moonlight. The Senate protests, declaring silk an immoral luxury, a threat to Roman virtue. But the protest is futile. Once the people have felt silk against their skin, they cannot return to wool or linen. Desire has become empire's new diplomacy. Between Han and Rome, 1,000 smaller realms bloom like flowers between stones. The Kushan Empire, ruling lands from northern India to Bactria, becomes a crossroads of faith and exchange. It is here that Buddhism spreads, carried not by armies but by travelers, monks walking barefoot through mountains, scrolls wrapped in silk. They carry with them not conquest, but compassion. And Azteco temples rise along the road like lanterns guiding the weary. In these lands, the Silk Road becomes more than an artery of trade. It becomes a river of ideas. From Greece come philosophies of reason and geometry. From India, the mysteries of medicine and mathematics. From China, the art of papermaking and the rhythm of poetry. Every idea that travels is changed slightly by its journey, shaped by the minds it touches. By the time it reaches a distant shore, it has become something new, a blend of East and West, of logic and dream. Empires rise, and their borders shift like dunes in the wind. Yet the road remains stubborn and eternal, threading through their histories. The Parthians give way to the sun, the Hun fade, and the Temsa rise, painting their dynasty with gold and song. Each age brings its own builders, its own guardians of trade. The Temps emperors understand that wealth lies not in hoarding but in connecting. They reopen the roads, rebuild the watchtowers, and welcome merchants from as far as Byzantium. Their capital Shangan becomes a mirror of the world. Persians praying beside Chinese poets, Indian scholars debating with Greek physicians. Here, every face tells a story from another corner of the earth. The road's heartbeat is strongest in these ages of openness. Whenever empires build bridges rather than walls, the Silk Road thrives. Whenever they retreat into fear and suspicion, the road grows silent. Trade depends not only on wealth, but on trust. And trust is the rarest treasure of all. The merchants who walk these paths know this truth. They carry seals and letters of passage, stamped by distant kings, each one a fragile promise of safety. In the deserts of Central Asia, where sand can bury an army, those small marks of ink are worth more than gold. They are faith made tangible, belief in cooperation, in humanity's shared word. Sometimes, when night falls and the fires flicker low, the traders speak of the world they have seen. One has visited the Indus Valley, where craftsmen shape jewels from river stones. Another has seen the domes of Palmyra, glowing like pearls under the Syrian sun. A third tells of ships that sail from Alexandria to the coasts of Africa, their sails filled with spicy scented wind. Each story spreads wonder, and in that wonder, 1,000 new journeys are born. Even emperors are not immune to this curiosity. To rule the world is one thing, to understand it, another. And so, embassies are sent, not of soldiers, but of scholars and scribes, bearing gifts and letters, their mission to learn. A tongue poet writes of an envoy from Samarkand, who brought horses that sweated blood, and a flute carved from ivory that sang like the human voice. The road hums with this exchange, half myth, half truth, entirely human. The Silk Road is now no longer a path of survival. It has become civilization itself, the shared pulse between distant hearts. Its wealth flows not just in gold, but in the unseen riches of imagination. Because every empire that touched the road learned, in its own way, that to connect is to endure. Even today, when we speak of globalization, we echo these ancient truths. For the Han and the Romans were the first to learn what we still struggled to remember, that the world is not divided by walls of stone or ocean, but joined by invisible threads of trade, story, and dream. And if you listen closely to the hum of a modern city, to the quiet thrum of data crossing fiber optic seas, you may still hear it, the rhythm of the old road, the heartbeat of exchange that began with the meeting of empires under desert skies. The fire burns low again. The caravan halts near a ruined fort, its walls carved with forgotten scripts. The leader dismounts, presses his hand against the stone, and murmurs, "All who passed before us built the road beneath our feet." In that moment, the centuries fold upon themselves. Every empire, every traveler, every whispered bargain in a distant market still lives within the dust of this ancient highway. The stars rise once more. The camels settle. Tomorrow, the caravan will move again toward another horizon, carrying with it the eternal thread of connection. The same thread that binds empires, and the same that even now binds us. Caravans and companionship, the night fades softly into pale gold. A low wind moves through the dunes, stirring the tents of a sleeping caravan. Bells tinkle faintly from the necks of camels as they shift in the cool air. The desert, for a moment, feels at peace, ancient and eternal. But when the first light touches the horizon, the stillness begins to stir. A voice calls. A kettle clinks. The smell of hot tea mingles with the sharp scent of dust and wool. The Silk Road awakens, not as a line upon a map, but as a living thing, breathing through the movements of those who call it home. Not every traveler upon this road was an emperor or scholar. Most were ordinary souls, merchants, herders, guides, guards, cooks, scribes, and dreamers. They came from every corner of the known world, yet they shared the same rhythm of footsteps and faith. Listen, and you can almost hear them. The chatter of Sogdian traders, fluent in half a dozen tongues. The laughter of Turkish horsemen, sharpening their blades beside the fire. The murmured prayers of a Chinese silk merchant counting his bundles by lamplight. Each had his reason to walk this road. Some sought wealth, others wisdom. Some fled war, others chased hope. But all found companionship along the way, for no one survived this journey alone. The Silk Road was a teacher, and its first lesson was trust. Across deserts where compasses failed, men learned to rely not on maps, but on one another. A caravan was a world unto itself, a moving village bound by cooperation. The Sogdians, masters of trade from the valleys of Central Asia, often led the way. They were the polyglots of antiquity, able to speak Persian, Chinese, Greek, and Sanskrit with ease. They acted as translators, negotiators, and sometimes peacemakers. To them, the road was not divided by nations, but by distances to be endured. Beside them rode Persian camel drivers, their faces wrapped against the sand. At the rear walked Indian traders, leading donkeys laden with spices and cotton. A few Greek artisans traveled too, offering glasswork and carved ivory. And scattered among them were Buddhist monks, Nestorian Christians, and Zoroastrian priests, each whispering prayers into the same desert air. So many fights, so many languages, yet on the road, they spoke one common dialect. Survival. The caravan moved like a slow river of patience. By day, they traveled beneath a furnace sky. The air shimmered, the dunes breathed heat. The travelers covered their faces and spoke little, saving their voices for the evening cool. By night, when the stars rose like lanterns, the camp came alive. Tents unfolded in neat rows. Fires crackled. A stew of lentils and dates simmered in bronze pots. Storytellers began their work recounting news of distant lands, of kings dethroned and cities reborn. Laughter echoed against the dunes, faint and musical. In that laughter lay the true soul of the Silk Road, the joy of shared endurance. One traveler, an old merchant named Ardashir, kept a small leather-bound book of debts and blessings. He would write down not only trades, but names of those who helped him along the way. A guide who shared water when the skins ran dry. A young herder who sang to the camels to keep them calm through the sandstorms. A healer who tended frostbitten feet in the mountain passes. Trade, he once said, is not what we carry in our hands, but what we carry in our hearts. And so, it was. The Silk Road was an economy built not only on goods, but on gratitude. Sometimes, entire caravans vanished, swallowed by the dunes or scattered by raiders. But for every journey lost, another began. There was always someone willing to risk it all for the promise of what lay beyond the horizon. The Taklamakan Desert was the most feared stretch of all. A place so deadly its name meant Goenaniwanti, yet across it the caravans went, their path marked by the bones of those who came before. To cross such a place demanded more than courage. It demanded faith in oneself, in the companions beside you, and in the road itself. At night, the desert offered its small mercies. The heat fell away. The sky opened wide, glittering with constellations that guided travelers like ancient sign. A Chinese merchant might point to the Big Dipper, while a Persian navigator read the Arc of Orion's belt. The heavens became a shared language, the first universal map. Sometimes, around the fire, the monks would speak of the middle way, the path between extremes, the road of balance. The merchants nodded, understanding not in doctrine but in experience, for on this long road, they too had learned balance between risk and reward, faith and fear, solitude and community. In time, bonds formed that no border could break. A trader might return home years later with a wife from far-off lands, children who spoke in two tongues, and a household where multiple gods were honored beneath one roof. Along the Silk Road, the boundaries of identity blurred like ink in water. What mattered was not where you came from, but that you kept walking. A traveler from Byzantium once wrote, "The Silk Road is a mirror in which we see both our faces, the one we were born with, and the one we discover along the way." And perhaps that is why the road endured, not because of gold or silk, but because it allowed people to find themselves in others. By the 5th century, great cities had risen along the caravan routes. Khotan, Merv, some. Each city thrived not through conquest, but through welcome. Merchants arriving weary from the desert found rest, food, and laughter. Caravanserais, the roadside inns, became sanctuaries of safety and exchange. Imagine entering one at dusk, a tall gate opening into a courtyard filled with camels kneeling beside fountains, oil lamps swinging from wooden beams, voices echoing in 10 different languages, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and burning myrrh. Within these walls, the world felt united. Deals were struck, songs were shared, friendships sealed, and in those nights of peace, far from home yet surrounded by kin of every kind, travelers forgot the divisions of empire. Companionship on the road was not merely comfort, it was protection. Bandits and storms were constant threats, and only together could the travelers survive them. The old merchant, Ardashir's book, recorded such trials. A blizzard in the Pamirs, where men clung to one another for warmth. A sandstorm that buried their path for 2 days, leaving only the stars to guide them home. Each time they survived, the bonds between them grew stronger, woven like threads of silk into the fabric of their shared journey. Centuries later, when the caravans are long gone and the digital maps of our world glow on screens instead of parchment, the same truth remains. Every path worth walking depends on companionship. Every trade, every exchange, every shared idea is an act of trust, an echo of those who once stood together beneath the desert sky. And if you close your eyes tonight, dear listener, you might still hear them. The faint clink of camel bells, the low hum of voices telling stories beside the fire. A song, half Persian, half Chinese, carried by the wind. They are still walking, those travelers, not through sand, but through time, carrying their quiet message. The road is long, but no one walks it alone. The bazaar of ideas in the heart of the desert, the wind has no memory. It whispers the same lullaby it sang 1,000 years ago, yet every traveler who hears it leaves a trace behind. The caravans may have carried silk, jade, or saffron, but their most precious cargo was invisible. Thoughts, ideas, once spoken beside a campfire or painted on a temple wall, drifted farther than any caravan could travel, and in that unseen exchange lay the truest wealth of the Silk Road. Imagine, dear listener, walking into one of the great cities of the route, perhaps, or Merv, or Kangan. From a distance, you might hear the clang of hammers shaping copper, the calls of merchants advertising wool and incense, the laughter of children chasing doves through narrow streets. But as you draw closer, another sound begins to rise above the marketplace noise. The murmur of debate, the rhythm of conversation, a Persian astronomer arguing with an Indian mathematician over the movement of the stars, a Greek physician showing a Chinese monk how to read a pulse, a Buddhist scholar translating sacred texts into a new tongue, so that their message might cross another frontier. This, too, was commerce, but a commerce of minds. The Silk Road, you see, was not only a path of goods, but a living network of knowledge. Through its veins flowed not only silk, but the stories, sciences, and spiritual philosophies of entire civilizations. As caravans wound through the deserts, so too did ideas win through the centuries. Paper, for example, born in Han, China, traveled westward. At first, it was a curiosity, fragile compared to parchment, yet astonishingly practical. By the time it reached Samarkand, its secret had been transformed by local artisans into an industry. From there, it reached Baghdad, where scholars of the Abbasid Caliphate used it to copy works of philosophy, medicine, and mathematics. And finally, it reached Europe, where it became the silent foundation of the Renaissance. A single invention, a simple sheet of pressed fiber, became the Silk Road's most enduring passenger. But it wasn't just objects that moved. Entire worldviews migrated. Buddhism left India and took root in China, then journeyed farther east to Korea and Japan. Nestorian Christianity found its way to Mongolia and beyond. Zoroastrian ideas of light and darkness seeped into new myth. Every faith that touched the road borrowed something, gave something, and changed in return. The gods themselves, one might say, learned to travel. In a caravanserai courtyard one evening, a Sogdian trader might be found seated beside a monk from Dunhuang and a philosopher from Antioch. Between them lay a clay lamp, its flame wavering in the desert breeze. They spoke of the nature of truth. The monk described it as a wheel turning through time. The philosopher called it a mirror, showing us who we are. The trader laughed softly and said, "Truth is a road, my friends, and we are all merely travelers." Such moments were common along the Silk Road moments, when the world seemed briefly united by thought rather than power. In the bustling bazaars, this meeting of minds spilled into every art. Music changed its rhythm as Indian drums met Persian strings. Cuisine became a patchwork of spices. Cinnamon from Ceylon, garlic from the steppe, sesame from Mesopotamia. Even fashion told the story. Silk dyed with indigo from the Indus, stitched with golden thread from Byzantium. A traveler could stand in a single marketplace and witnessed half the world reflected in a single stall. And in those mingling colors and scents, humanity's shared imagination quietly flourished. But not all exchanges were peaceful. Where ideas met, so too did ideologies. The same roads that carried wisdom also carried conflict. The question of which truth was truest, which God most divine. Empires rose, not only from trade, but from the power to define what should be believed. Even then, however, the road refused to belong to any one voice. It carried all saints and skeptics, poets and conquerors, dreamers and spies. The Silk Road strength was never in its certainty, but in its conversation. Centuries later, the echo of that conversation still lingers in our modern world. Consider, dear listener, how swiftly an idea travels today from one continent to another, from one culture to the next, carried not by caravan but by code. The internet, in truth, is the Silk Road reborn, invisible but vast, humming with exchange. Our digital bazaars filled with data instead of spices mirror those ancient markets. The same promises and the same perils remain. Opportunity and overload, wisdom and deception, connection and misunderstanding. The ancient travelers faced sandstorms. We face information storms. Yet the lesson endures. Ideas, once shared, cannot be confined. One old legend from the Silk Road tells of a blind storyteller who traveled from oasis to oasis with nothing but his memory. Each night, he would tell tales of kings and gods, of stars that sang in cities of glass. Listeners would gather, offering bread or coin, and when he left, they would repeat his stories in their own words. The tales changed, grew, blended with others, until no one could tell where the original ended or began. That storyteller never owned his stories, yet through him, they became immortal. So too did the Silk Road itself, not as a single route of sand and stone, but as a great, shared memory of exchange. In Samarkand, a scholar once etched these words upon a wall. Trade, we must, not only in goods, but in understanding. And if we listen closely, we can still hear that call. For every time we learn from another culture, every time we share our art, our science, or our story, we walk that ancient road once more. Not upon sand, but across the networks that bind our century. So rest easy tonight. The same wind that once carried whispers between empires now moves through the unseen corridors of the digital world. And though our caravans are made of light and sound, the journey remains the same. A search for connection, for meaning, for the voices that make the world feel smaller and kinder. The desert sleeps, but the conversation continues. Across time, Akra's worlds, Akra skirts, the road of ideas, said the blind storyteller, never ends. It only changes its name. The merchant's ledger, lessons in trade and trust in every age. There are two kinds of wealth. The kind that fills the purse, and the kind that fills the soul. The Silk Road taught both. Long before the modern language of supply chains and stock markets, the world learned the art of trade upon this winding road of dust. Every oasis was a marketplace. Every handshake a treaty. Every promise a risk. Here, merchants were not merely traders of goods. They were keepers of faith. Picture, if you will, the ancient bazaar of Kashgar at dawn. The city still half asleep. The horizon glows rose gold. A caravan rolls in from the east. Weary camels kneel, their loads heavy with silk, porcelain, and fine lacquered boxers. Another caravan waits to depart westward, bearing wool, glass, and pomegranates. Bound for summer, the air smells of resin and spice, of sweat and hope. Merchants begin their ritual of trade, not with shouting, but with the slow ceremony of trust. Hands meet, eyes hold. A price is spoken, then silence. No contract written in ink, only the weight of a word. In that moment, every merchant's ledger was sacred. A thin book of parchment and prayer, not only a record of goods, but of people. Each entry was a story. 2 bolts of silk traded for 4 amphorae of wine. Settled fair, trustworthy man. Beside each number lay an invisible line of faith, drawn between strangers. If a man's word held true, his name would travel faster than his caravan. If it failed, he would vanish from the trade like a mirage. Thus, across thousands of miles, reputation became the first currency of the Silk Road. It was an economy without borders, guided not by laws of empire, but by honor. A merchant from Bukhara might never meet his partner from Antioch, yet both would trust one another's seal. They had 4 letters of credit, bills of exchange, and courier promissory notes were the lifelines of their journeys. In the ruins of Dunhuang, archaeologists once found such a letter, written on paper no thicker than a petal. It promised payment for a shipment of wool, to be honored 3,000 miles away. It bore no royal stamp, only the sign of 2 traders, and a witness from a distant caravanserai. That fragile piece of trust had survived 1,000 years. And so, the Silk Road birthed. More than trade, it birthed finance. The first credit systems, money exchanges, and insurance practices took form along these paths. A merchant would divide his cargo among several caravans, ensuring that even if bandits claimed one, another would reach its destination. Others stored their profits with trusted partners in foreign cities. The ancient version of an international bank. They understood risk, not as something to be feared, but to be managed, a principle that echoes even in today's digital marketplaces. But behind the coin and contract lay something gentler: mutual dependence. A merchant could not walk the road alone. He needed the camel driver who knew where water hid beneath the dunes. He needed the interpreter who bridged languages. He needed the cook, the guard, the healer, the scribe. And when storms came or bandits struck, they became one family beneath the same desperate sky. An old proverb whispered among traders said, "He who cheats his partner cheats the road itself." The Silk Road was, after all, more than sand and stone. It was a moral terrain, shaped by the invisible architecture of trust. One tale tells of a Persian trader named Bahram, who lost half his cargo in a flood near the Oxus River. He sent word ahead to his partner in Samarkand, confessing his loss and offering to repay the debt in time. The partner replied not with anger, but Wida heaved a small pouch of saffron, the rarest of all spices, and a single line of poetry. "Gold is the weight of the hand, not the purse." That small gesture restored Bahram's standing among the caravans. Years later, when the same partner's route was struck by drought, Bahram repaid him thrice over. In their quiet exchange, we glimpse the timeless truth of commerce, that prosperity thrives where generosity flows both ways. For all its grandeur, the Silk Road was also fragile. Fortunes were lost as quickly as they were made. A single raid, a bad harvest, a rumor of plague, and an entire network could crumble. Yet even in loss, there was learning. Merchants adapted, rerouted, rebuilt. They learned to diversify, to read the signs of weather and politics alike. When one city declined, another rose. When one empire closed its gates, others opened theirs. The Silk Road's pulse endured, because its merchants understood resilience. The quiet strength of persistence through change. Their lessons reach across the centuries, whispering still to our modern world. Today's entrepreneurs, digital traders, and business leaders may never smell desert air or hear camel bells, yet they walk the same invisible road. Emails and cargo ships, data flows, and international deals. All of it depends on the same ancient pillars: trust, adaptability, partnership. Every online store that honors its promise, every international collaboration built on goodwill, is a modern caravan of the mind. We have simply traded the sand for signal. The merchant's ledger, in this new age, is written not in ink, but in reputation metrics, customer feedback, and digital trace. The principle remains unchanged: to build connection through consistency, to turn trade into relationship, and relationship into legacy. What the ancient traders learned through hardship, we relearn through technology. That commerce without conscience is as empty as a caravan without a destination. As night deepens, picture once more the merchant camps. Fires flicker low. The stars burn wide over the dunes. A handful of traders sit apart, reading by lamplight. One writes in his ledger, carefully, reverently, his daily entries. He lists what he has sold, what he has gained, and, quietly at the end, a line in the margin: "May my word travel farther than my goods." When he closes the book and lies back beneath the endless sky, perhaps he dreams of roads yet unseen, of a time when trade will move not upon sand, but upon light. And somewhere, far in the future, we will open our own ledgers and see his reflection there. A reminder that the heart of business was always and will always be human. Empires of exchange, power and politics on the Silk Road. The Silk Road was never a single line drawn across the earth. It was a living web, fragile, changing, forever influenced by the empires that claimed to guard it. But though kings and conquerors raised their banners along its path, the road belonged to no one. It flowed through realms like water through fingers, shaping them even as they tried to shape it. Let us begin where the East meets the dawn, China, under the mighty Han Dynasty. It was here, more than 2,000 years ago, that the road first took breath. The Han emperors, seeking horses from the far west to strengthen their armies, sent envoys through the deserts. Among them was a man named Zheng Qian, whose long captivity and longer journey opened a world unknown. When he returned, scarred by years of wandering, he brought back not gold nor glory, But maps of kingdoms, no Chinese had yet seen. He spoke of Fergana, Bactria, Parthia, and lands beyond the Oxus, where the world curved toward Rome. And so the emperor decreed, "We shall trade with the West, and the road shall be our bridge to the world." From that decree began one of humanity's grandest experiments in connection. Meanwhile, far to the west, another empire looked eastward with equal hunger, Rome. Its senators draped themselves in Chinese silk, so fine it was said a man could see the outline of a coin beneath it. Roman merchants, though never reaching China itself, dealt with Parthian middlemen who guarded their routes like dragons guarding gold. Between these two giants lay the crossroads of civilization, Central Asia, Persia, and Arabia, lands that became both bridge and battlefield. The Silk Road's fortunes rose and fell with these powers. When empires were strong, the road bloomed with safety. When they fractured, the sands grew dangerous again. The Parthians, masters of diplomacy, charged heavy tolls but kept the peace. Their successors, the Sassanids, turned trade into art-building caravanserais and guarding passas with disciplined soldiers. Farther north, Kushan kings spread the message of the Buddha while taxing silk and spice alike. Every ruler, great or small, sought to claim a share of the road's invisible wealth. Yet none could truly control it, for the Silk Road belonged to motion itself. Still, power followed profit. Cities that once slept in silence became jewels of empire. Merv, Bukhara, Nishapa. Samarkand, names that glittered on every merchant's tongue. Here emperors built their palaces beside markets, knowing that coin was the lifeblood of kingship. The clatter of trade carts echoed through marble courtyards, and at night, the scent of myrrh and sandalwood drifted through colonnades, where poets sang of caravans crossing starlit dunes. In these cities, to Silk Roads, true empire was built, not of armies, but of exchange. But the roads' gifts were double. Wealth drew envy, and envy drew war. The Roman-Parthian conflicts, fought across Mesopotamia, were not merely about land, but about who would command the flow of silk and gold. Centuries later, the Tensei dynasty of China waged long campaigns to secure its western frontier, ensuring that the flow of trade through the Tarim Basin would remain unbroken. Each empire claimed to protect the merchants, yet in truth, it was the merchants who kept the empires alive. But when the caravans ceased to move, treasuries ran dry, and even the proudest banners fell still. Among the greatest of all Silk Road patrons was the Mongol Empire. When Genghis Khan and his descendants forged their vast dominion from the Yellow Sea to the Black, the road found a strange kind of unity. For nearly a century, from the 1200s onward, the world was bound under the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Under their rule, messengers galloped across steppes faster than ever before. Caravans traveled from Venice to Beijing with relative safety. Persian engineers built bridges in China. Chinese doctors healed princes in Persia. Even Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant, could ride unbroken through a dozen realms without drawing his sword. It was, for a brief and brilliant moment, the first globalization of the world. Yet power, like the desert wind, never stays long in one direction. When the Mongol peace crumbled, the road splintered again. Cities, Borned dynasties fell, and the merchants scattered. The world turned its gaze toward the sea. New routes, new empires, new ambitions. But though the ships carried goods faster, none carried the same spirit. This Silk Road, slow journey had allowed something the oceans never could. Understanding. For every treaty signed, 1,000 quiet friendships had been forged on the sand between Sogdian and Turk, Arab and Chinese, Buddhist and Christian. And though the empires that claimed to rule them faded, their shared memory remained. There is a quiet irony in history that the most lasting empires are not those of conquest, but of connection. The Silk Road proved this truth again and again. Where armies marched, cities fell. But where merchants traded, civilizations met and mingled. A single merchant's journey could outlast the lifetime of an emperor. A single letter of credit could bridge more distance than 1,000 miles of conquest. And so, While kings dreamed of dominion, the caravans quietly built the world beneath their feet. Even now, in our digital age, the echoes of those power plays remain. Nations still compete for influence through trade routes and technology. The modern Silk Road, reborn as global infrastructure and data exchange, carries the same ambitions: to connect, to control, to profit, and one hopes to understand. But history whispers its warning. Power that forgets purpose will crumble, as all sandcastles do, as the stars deepen above the desert. Imagine the glow of distant campfires, each belonging to a different empire, yet all burning with the same fragile flame. The caravans sleep between them, indifferent to crowns. Tomorrow, they will rise again, following a road older than kings, guided not by banners, but by instinct. For in the end, the Silk Road's truest empire is invisible. An empire of shared destiny, of countless hands and hopes woven into one long, unending thread. Demetius Rulus, an old Sogdian proverb, said, "Rule but for a season, but the road rules forever." And so it does, even now, even here, in the flow of data, in the hum of commerce, in the bridges we build across distance and difference. The old empire of exchange endures. Shadows on the road night had settled upon the mountains when the first whisper of danger arrived. It came not in the sound of battle or in the flash of steel, but in the uneasy silence that sometimes grips the desert before a storm. The caravan's fires burned low, flickering against the rocky slopes. Camels shifted restlessly, and traders murmured in uneasy tones, glancing toward the horizon where a distant wind carried dust and omen alike. The Silk Road had always been more than a highway of wealth. It was a thread stretched, taut between promise and peril. For every merchant who returned home rich, there were a dozen whose names were swallowed by sand, whose dreams were left unburied beneath the dunes. They root Gavi, but it also took, and tonight it felt alive again, restless, almost hungry. At dawn, the caravan moved with quiet haste. Word had spread of bandits lurking near the ravines ahead, men who once traded in salt and silk, but had turned to robbery when fortune fled. The lead guide, a Sogdian with weathered eyes, rode ahead in silence, scanning every shadow. Yet even as danger prowled, the road did not stop. Trade never truly ceased, for hunger and hope are stronger than fear. As the hours passed, the landscape seemed to close in jagged cliffs, rising like broken teeth, wind howling through narrow passes. Here, the old alliances of trust were tested. The travelers spoke less, the clatter of hooves muffled by dust. And then, when the sun burned at its highest, they saw them. Figures at the ridge, their faces wrapped, their blades glinting like shards of sky. The attack, when it came, was swift. Cries echoed across the valley, arrows iced, and the peace of the road shattered like glass. Yet the merchants fought not as warriors but as survivors, forming a ring around their goods, shouting warnings in a dozen languages. It was chaos, brief and brutal. When at last the bandits melted back into the rocks, only silence remained, heavy as ash. The loss was small in measure, a few bolts of silk, some frightened camels. But it left a deeper wound upon the spirit. Around the campfire that night, the survivors spoke little. The old Sogdian broke the quiet first. "We forget," he said softly, "that even the fairest road casts a shadow. The world's beauty is never without its teeth." His words hung in the smoke, drifting upward into the stars. Days turned into weeks, and the caravan pressed onward. Yet danger was not always born of blade or bandit. Sometimes it rode upon the wind unseen. In the city of Merv, whispers spread of a sickness moving westward, invisible, merciless, carried by travelers and trade alike. Some called it a fever, others a curse. It crept along the same routes that once carried silk and spices, proving that connection, for all its gifts, can also bear the weight of ruin. In time, that unseen visitor would become legend, the Black Death. From the ports of the East to the towns of Europe, it traveled upon ships, across deserts, hidden in the fur of rats and the breath of men. Entire cities fell silent. Bells tolled until their ropes frayed. Priests prayed beside merchants who had once boasted of fortune, and kings trembled behind locked gates. The same networks that once made the world vibrant now made it vulnerable. The road that had united humanity in trade now bounded in shared grief. And yet, even then, it endured. When the plague passed, when the bandits faded, when empires rose and fell, the Silk Road remained. Perhaps not in the same shining form, but like a river that finds new channels when blocked. Traders turned their routes north or south, across steppes or seas. Ideas still moved, carried by pilgrims and poets. The road's shape changed, but its soul did not. For the Silk Road was never simply geography. It was a way of being, a rhythm of persistence, adaptation, and quiet courage. It was built not by kings, but by countless small acts of endurance. A traveler offering water to a stranger, a merchant sharing shelter in a storm, a village rebuilding its market after fire. Each gesture, unseen and unrecorded, kept the great road alive. One evening, as you walk among the tents, you notice an elderly woman tending a small lamp. Its flame is weak against the night, trembling in the wind. "The storm took everything," she says, without looking up. "But as long as one flame remains, the road remembers." You watch the light flicker, and for a moment, it feels as though the entire history of human exchange rests within that fragile glow. Centuries later, scholars would speak of resilience as if it were an invention of the modern age, a strategy, a theory. But here, upon the Silk Road, resilience was born of necessity. The merchants knew that every journey carried risk, every fortune its fall, yet still they traveled, still they traded. Still they believed that connection was worth the danger. As the caravan moves once more beneath the waning moon, the landscape softens, the air grows cooler, the stars brighter. Behind you lie ruins, cities abandoned, empires forgotten, but ahead stretches the same endless path. The sound of the camel's bells returns, faint but steady, like a heartbeat beneath the wind. The road breathes again. It has known shadows, storms, and sorrow, but it endures. For that is what the Silk Road teaches most deeply, that civilization is not defined by its triumphs, but by its ability to begin again after loss. You look back once more, seeing the faint glimmer of the old woman's lamp far behind, a single star upon the ground. The sands will swallow it soon enough, as they swallow everything. And yet, somewhere beyond sight, another lamp will be lit, another caravan will form, and the song of the road will begin anew. The wind rises, carrying the scent of faraway lands, and the faint echo of laughter. Tomorrow's journey waits, and though shadows linger, the light has never truly left. The great intermission, the road sleeps. Once, its sands had echoed with the bells of caravans and the laughter of merchants, but now the wind moves alone. To Silk Road, that shimmering thread between worlds, has quieted beneath centuries of dust. Cities that once glowed with lanterns and trade have faded into ruins. Their gates stand open to no one. Their wells are dry. The music of the bazaar has been replaced by silence, deep, endless, and patient. And yet, there's a strange peace in this stillness. The desert has always known how to wait. It is the age of ships now. Beyond the horizon, in distant harbors, wooden vessels stretch their sails toward the unknown. The seas have become the new highways, and the wind their loyal guide. From Lisbon to Calicut, from Mascut to Canton, merchants chart their fortunes upon water rather than sand. The Silk Road, once the artery of the earth, lies forgotten, its routes replaced by tides. But as the caravans dwindle, they leave behind ghosts. In every ruined watchtower and half-buried caravanserai, the memory of movement lingers. You can almost hear it when the night is quiet enough. The murmur of languages, the crackle of firelight, the low hum of a song shared between travelers who no longer live yet, whose voices have not entirely vanished. The Mongol Empire has fallen. The peace that once held the continents together has fractured into smaller realms, each guarding its borders with suspicion. Where once the road carried silk and faith, it now carries soldiers and taxes. Fear replaces curiosity. Control replaces exchange. Even the great cities, Samarkand, Merv, Kashgar, grow weary. They survive, yes, but their splendor has dimmed. Still, beneath their faded mosaics, the earth remembers. Beneath their cracked stones, the road sleeps, not dead, merely dreaming. One evening, you find yourself standing upon an ancient causeway near the Oxus River. The stars are out, reflected faintly in the slow-moving water. There is no caravan here, no sound but the sighing of reeds. Yet somehow the place feels alive, as though the world itself breathes softly through these forgotten stones. The air tastes of dust and memory. You close your eyes and imagine what once was. Torches gleaming, hooves striking rhythm, voices trading in a dozen tongues, and for a moment, the illusion returns. In the dim corners of your mind, you can almost see them, merchants from the east and west, passing one another with nods of understanding, their wagons heavy with silk, paper, and dreams. A monk walks beside a camel driver, discussing the stars. A young girl balances a basket of saffron on her head, humming to herself. They are gone, yet not gone. Their stories cling to the air, to the sand, to you. When you open your eyes again, the night has deepened, and the road lies quiet once more. The world has moved on, but its heartbeat has not stopped. The centuries drift by like clouds. Empires rise, new maps are drawn, and kings carve their ambitions into the corners of parchment. The Silk Road fades from memory, known only to a few scholars and wandering mystics. Some say it was never real, only legend, a tale of faraway lands and impossible journeys. Others speak of it as a symbol, a myth of unity in a divided world. But myths, like seeds, have their own patience. Beneath the sand, beneath the weight of time, something endures a pulse. Faint but steady. The caravans may be gone, yet their roots remain written in the bones of the earth. The wind still follows them. The stars still mark them. The idea of connection, the dream that once bound east and west, has not perished. It waits, like embers beneath ash, for breath to awaken it again. You travel on through empty valleys, where the walls of ancient inns crumble into shadow. Each ruin feels like a story paused amidst a carved stone doorframe here, a painted tile there, fragments of beauty that refuse to die. A faded mural of merchants clasping hands remains on a fallen wall, their faces half lost to time, yet their gesture clear. Even silence carries meaning in such places. At dusk, the horizon glows, the color of bronze. The air cools, the desert sighs, and you feel a strange tenderness for this forgotten road. Not pity, but respect. For every age must rest before it rises again. Far to the west, the sea routes hum with activity. Portuguese sailors mapping Africa's curve, Arab captains steering by stars, Chinese junks gliding over moonlit waves. The same goods once borne by camel are now carried by ship. Silk, porcelain, tea, spices. The pattern continues. Only the surface changes. Humanity's hunger to connect never ceases. It merely takes new form. And so the Silk Road dreams on, beneath both sand and sea. In your mind, you can almost hear it breathing. It waits for rediscovery, for the moment when curiosity will stir again in the hearts of men. For though the merchants are gone and the empire's fallen, the desire that once built this road, the yearning to know, to reach, to trade, to understand, is eternal. It sleeps lightly, as all great dreams do. You camp one night beside the ruins of a caravansary, where half a wall remains to shelter you from the wind. The stars shimmer through the cracks, bright as coins. The silence feels endless, but not empty. Somewhere beyond that horizon, you sense movement. Perhaps a lone traveler. Perhaps only imagination, yet you smile all the same. For you know the truth now. No road that ever bound hearts and minds together can truly vanish. As dawn breaks, the light spills across the dunes like a slow tide. You rise, brush the sand from your cloak, and set out once more. The path beneath your feet may no longer lead to bustling markets or crowded bazaars, but it leads somewhere older, deeper, into memory itself. and as the wind rises to greet you, whispering softly through the reeds, it carries the faintest echo of voices long past, calling not for trade or wealth, but for connection. The Silk Road sleeps. Yes, but not forever. Rediscovery and romanticism, the centuries have drifted by like desert clouds, silent, unhurried, and vast. The Silk Road, once bright as a river of life, lies buried under the patient dust of time. But time, for all its power, never forgets completely. Somewhere beneath the shifting sands, beneath forgotten cities and sleeping stones, the old road waits for curious hearts to find it once more. It begins, as rediscoveries often do, not with armies or empires, but with men and women who look beyond the map and wonder what stories lie in the blank spaces. In the late 19th century, when the industrial age hums loudly in the West and steam replaces the silence of the camel, a new kind of traveler appears. The explorer, not for trade, not for conquest, but for memory. They come with notebooks instead of swords, cameras instead of caravans, and a hunger not for gold, but for meaning. Errol Stein, quiet, methodical, patient, walks into the Taklamakan Desert with only a few guides, and a dog named Dash the Desert, whose very name means the place of no return, stretches endless before him. Yet Stein listens to the whispers of rumor, of buried temples and hidden caves. In the dry air near Dunhuang, in stim the Mogao caves, sanctuaries filled with murals and manuscripts, untouched for 1,000 years. By the flicker of lantern light, he lifts from the sand a scroll, soft, fragile, yet alive with ink and story. It speaks of monks and merchants, of kings and pilgrims, of a road once rich with life. His discovery stirs the sleeping world. Elsewhere, Sven Hedden, bold, restless, romantic, rides across the same deserts, charting rivers that no longer flow, sketching cities swallowed by time. His journals breathe with awe. He calls the Silk Road the grand artery of civilization. Even as the wind tears at his tent, he writes that the silence of the desert feels like the breathing of the past. In the ruins of Lulan, Nia, and Turfan, other explorers dig and dream. Paul Pelliot, Albert Ponlecoq, Langdon Warner, each uncovering fragments of the forgotten. They gather coins, statues, fragments of silk, and scrolls that once crossed between worlds. Museums in London, Paris, and Berlin begin to fill with relics of that long-vanished road, and the name Silk Road, a term coined only recently, becomes more than history. It becomes poetry. The West, in its fascination, begins to romanticize. Painters and poets imagine camel trains moving through moonlit dunes, monks chanting in lost monasteries, princesses from Persia, draped in silk finer than air. The road becomes myth again, not merely geography, but imagination. And yet, behind the romance lies a truth deeper and gentler. These rediscoveries remind humanity of something it had almost forgotten, that its past was shared, that before there were borders and flags, there were paths, and before there were nations, there were travelers, people who carried stories instead of weapons, gifts instead of demands. To Silk Road's memory becomes a mirror, reflecting what we once were and what we might still be. You walk now in the mind's eye, through one of those excavated cities. The air smells faintly of dust and incense. Faded murals glow softly in lamplight, figures of bodhisattvas, merchants, scholars, and kings. Their colors, though dimmed by centuries, still breathed with warmth. You feel a reverence here, not for wealth or empire, but for the persistence of human curiosity. Every brushstroke, every fragment, every line of ancient script feels like a whisper from a world that never wanted to vanish, only to rest until it could be understood again. The explorers, for all their ambition, often cannot grasp the full weight of what they've unearthed. They ship crates of manuscripts to faraway cities, never realizing that each scrap of parchment is not a relic, but a heartbeat, a small piece of the living road. Yet even in their imperfection, they become its new carriers. They are the modern caravans, bearing knowledge instead of silk. In the salons of Europe, the rediscovered East becomes the subject of fascination. Scholars translate the texts, writers evoke the golden sands and vanished caravans. Maps, once blank, are filled again, not with conquest, but with connection. The Silk Road lives once more, this time in imagination, art, and memory. It is strange how his Isle beauty returns to human thought, even after centuries of silence. One whisper, one relic, one half-remembered legend can awaken it again. The idea of the Silk Road, this thread that once stitched continents together, begins to glow quietly in the collective mind. And so, what began as excavation becomes resurrection. The explorers who wandered seeking history become part of it. Their tents, their journals, their dusty boots, all now artifacts of rediscovery. They, too, walked the road, not upon the sand of the ancient path, but along its spirit, the eternal trail between curiosity and understanding. In the cool of evening, as the wind sighs through the empty corridors of Dunhuang, you can almost hear both echoes. The monks of old chanting sutras, and the modern scholars whispering translations. Two worlds, joined again by wonder. The night grows still. The lamps are low. Somewhere, beyond the dunes, the stars glimmer like ancient caravan fires. The Silk Road has awoken from its long sleep, not as it once was, but as a dream reborn, carried in the hearts of those who remember and imagine. And with that quiet awakening, the story prepares to step once more into the present, where the road, though changed in form, has never truly ended. The modern caravans, the dawn of the 20th century, come softly, not with the cry of camels, nor the jingle of traders' bells, but with the low hum of engines and the rattle of steel. The world, once measured by the length of a caravan's shadow, is now bound by rails and roads. Yet, beneath all the iron and invention, something ancient stirs the same spirit of exchange that once moved along the Silk Road-esque golden arteries. It begins quietly. Train lines stretch through Central Asia where once the caravan trails ran. The scent of smoke replaces that of camel leather and spice. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks echoes faintly the beat of hooves on sand. Traders still travel, but now their goods move in crates and carriages, their routes drawn by engineers instead of stars. In the early morning light, a train departs from Kashgar's whistle rising like a falcon's cry over the plains. It follows the bones of the old Silk Road, running parallel to paths long forgotten. From window seats, travelers gaze out upon the same horizons that once shimmered with caravans, the same mountains, the same wind-swept deserts, the same promise of the road ahead. Empires have changed, borders have hardened, yet the ancient rhythm endures. The Soviet Union, China, and the new nations of Central Asia all look to these lands, recognizing their hidden power, the gift of connection. Oil replaces silk, machinery replaces jade, but the idea remains that prosperity follows those who link rather than divide. In Pakistan, the mountain roads of the Karakoram twist like ancient threads through the high passes. The Karakoram Highway, sometimes called the eighth wonder of the world, binds the land to China through Hunza-S, shining valleys, and Gilgit-Swailed rivers. It is not merely an engineering feat. It is the old road reborn. Where once camel caravans trudged through snow and dust, now trucks rumble with fabrics, electronics, and dreams. Yet even amid all the progress, the echoes of the past linger. Drivers speak of the old traders' spirits that guard the path. In the bazaars of Kashgar and Peshawar, you can still buy the same spices, the same woven rugs, the same carved amulets once carried by merchants 1,000 years ago. The hands that trade today are not so different from those that did centuries before. Hands worn by work, guided by trust. And in the great cities, Karachi, Tashkent, Tehran, new kinds of caravans emerge. Airplanes trace invisible routes above the deserts. Ships move through ports where silk once landed, and information flows through wires thinner than a spider's thread. Each new invention extends the ancient pattern, weaving new roads of exchange across earth and air alike. But the modern world, for all its marvels, is not without its turbulence. The same roads that carry progress also carry conflict. Borders once invisible on sand are now guarded and drawn in ink. Nations struggle to define what was once freely shared. Yet, Through all this, the spirit of the Silk Road persists, stubborn, patient, and profoundly human. In the marketplaces of Samarkand, you can still hear dozens of languages mingling. Uzbek traders bargaining with Chinese merchants. Russian engineers share tea with Afghan craftsmen. Laughter replaces diplomacy. Trust is built not through treaties, but through simple human kindness. A shared cup, a fair deal, a nod of respect. The same gestures that once sustained the old caravans sustain the new. The 20th century moves swiftly. Wars rage, empires fall, economies rise. But the Silk Road, that invisible thread, adapts with every turn of history. It winds through telegraph lines, through shipping routes, through the oil pipelines that gleam across deserts. It lives not as a relic, but as a rhythm, a quiet pulse beneath the roar of modernity. In the 1960s, archaeologists return again to the old roots, this time with cameras, notebooks, and reverence. They find that even after centuries of silence, the people of the Silk Road remember. In small villages, families still tell stories of ancestors who rode with caravans to distant lands, to Damascus, to Delhi, to Byzantium. The tales are half history, half dream, but always alive. And so, the road continues, though few see it now. It runs beneath the highways of Asia, beneath railway ties and digital cables. It lives in every handshake between cultures, in every exchange of ideas, in every border crossed with curiosity instead of fear. At dusk, the train that left Kashgar glides into its destination. The desert outside glows gold under the setting sun. Passengers step out, stretching weary limbs, their faces touched by the same wind that once brushed the faces of silk traders long ago. There is a quiet poetry to it, this repetition of journey, this unbroken thread between centuries. The old Silk Road has not vanished. It has transformed. Its caravans no longer jingle with bells but hum with engines. Its maps are drawn not on parchment, but in data. Yet its essence remains unchanged. Connection, the eternal bridge between people, ideas, and worlds. As night settles over the desert once more, the wind carries an old whisper. Faint, but clear. All roads that seek understanding are part of the same path, and in that whisper, one can feel the truth that every traveler, ancient or modern, eventually learns. The road never truly ends. It only changes form, waiting for new feet to find it. Digital highways, the hum of the modern world is not the clatter of hooves, nor the rustle of silk, nor even the whistle of steam. It is Skeeter, yet somehow everywhere. A soft electrical sigh beneath every light, every screen, every wire that hums with invisible messages. The ancient Silk Road, once carved in sand and stone, now runs through air and code. If you could listen closely, beyond the noise of cities, you might still hear it. The murmuring rhythm of exchange, the timeless pulse of connection. Only now, it flows not through caravans, but through circuits and signals. Once, a merchant in Samarkand would wait months for news from Xi'an. Now, a trader in Karachi can send a message to Shanghai in less than a second. Once, a caravan carried silk and spices. Today, information itself has become the cargo, weightless, instant, unstoppable. The road has become invisible, but its spirit remains exactly the same. They call it the Digital Silk Road, an echo of the past reborn in glass and light. Fiber optic cables twist beneath oceans, tracing the same continents the old traders once crossed. Satellites drift silently above, their signals falling like starlight over the same deserts where camels once walked. The merchants of today wear no turbans or robes. They wear headsets and watches that glow with the same restless curiosity that drove their ancestors westward. Every click, every message, every transaction is a step along that infinite road. And just as it was in the past, the road is not merely about goods or wealth. It is about stories, about voices reaching across distance to be heard. In this new age, an artist in Lahore can collaborate with a designer in Lisbon, a scholar in Beijing can debate a thinker in Cairo, and a small business in the mountains of Gilgit can trade directly with the markets of Europe, all in the span of a breath. The same old dream connection now travels through light instead of dust, but as with every age of exchange, the new road carries both wonder and warning. The ancient caravans faced bandits and storms. The digital ones faced different dangers. Misinformation, greed, imbalance, and the shadows of power. The merchants of old learned to trust one another through conversation and shared tea. Now, trust must be rebuilt through encryption and code. The parallels are uncanny. Where once emperors built roads and caravanserais, nations today build networks and data corridors. The ancient Silk Road linked east and west through trade and diplomacy. The new one links them through commerce and communication. But beneath the technology, the same truth glows softly. Those who connect prosper, those who isolate fade. The Belt and Road Initiative, stretching from China through Central Asia to the ports of Pakistan and Africa, stands as a modern monument to that enduring vision. Some see it as ambition, others as alliance, but in either case, it follows the same ancient instinct: to weave rather than sever, to extend rather than withdraw. And as these new roads spread, digital, physical, and cultural, the old lessons resurface, that every exchange, whether of silk or data, demands empathy, that every bridge built between worlds must rest on trust, not dominance, and that progress, when it forgets its roots in cooperation, quickly turns hollow. Imagine, for a moment, standing in a darkened room filled with the faint glow of screens. Maps of the world shimmer in neon lines, data flowing like rivers between cities. Each glowing thread represents connection. Karachi to London, Beijing to Nairobi, Lahore to Los Angeles. In their quiet luminescence, they look almost alive, as if the old Silk Road itself has taken a new body, woven from photons instead of fabric. The hum of servers, the blink of routers, the pulse of wireless signals. It all feels strangely familiar. The great network of humanity, once carved across continents by caravans and kings, now hums silently beneath our fingertips. And yet, in this vast complexity, something beautifully simple endures. The same desire that moved a Sogdian trader to share his wine with a stranger, that inspired a Buddhist monk to carry scriptures westward, that led a Roman craftsman to wear silk from far-off China. It lives on in every message sent, every collaboration shared, every idea that crosses a border. The old Silk Road was about movement, not just of goods, but of minds. And so is the new. Today, our digital caravans carry knowledge. They carry art, laughter, wisdom, and kindness. They also carry noise, conflict, and confusion, as they always did. But through it all, the light keeps traveling. The stories keep flowing. The road keeps moving forward, endlessly reshaping itself with each innovation. Perhaps, if you close your eyes, you can picture it. The data streams flowing through the dark like caravans of light. The stars above satellites now still guide the way. The hum of the servers becomes the breath of the desert wind. And in that blending of past and present, you realize we never left the Silk Road at all. It simply followed us into the future. The storyteller's voice grows softer now, like sand settling after a long wind. The lesson of this chapter is gentle, but enduring. Technology does not replace our humanity. It carries Italiano. The Silk Road has always been a mirror of what we are: curious, creative, and hungry to connect. And though the roads may now stretch through clouds of data instead of dunes, the heart of the traveler remains the same. The road without end. Night falls once more over the vastness between east and west. The deserts are silent again, the cities humming softly beneath their towers of glass and light. Somewhere in the hush, between the fading stars and the waking dawn, the old Silk Road breathes. It has always breathed, not as dust, not as ruin, but as memory. If you listen closely, you can hear it. A faint sigh carried through centuries. The echo of wheels, the murmur of traders, the laughter of strangers meeting for the first time. It is the sound of humanity moving, always mobbing toward one another. The Silk Road was never merely a line upon the earth. It was, and remains, a rhythm of the heart, a song that every age reinterprets in its own language, in silk and spice, in steam and steel, in data and light, and perhaps in dreams. Now, as the world stands on the threshold of new horizons, artificial intelligence, digital economies, interplanetary ambitions, The same old question hums beneath the noise. How do we connect? How do we share without losing ourselves? The answers, it seems, still lie in that ancient path, that endless road that once linked empires and now links hearts. Once, it took courage to walk the deserts of Taklamakan, to face storms and solitude in search of another world. Today, courage takes a quieter form, to open a conversation across cultures, to listen before speaking, to trade knowledge. Instead of suspicion, the spirit of the Silk Road is not in the goods we exchange, but in the grace with which we meet. Imagine standing again upon those sands. The wind drifts slow across the dunes. The moon paints the world in silver. Before you stretch, the old tracks faint, but they're vanishing into the horizon. You know that beyond those ridges lie others walking too, unseen yet near. A poet in Persia, a scientist in Shanghai, a student in Islamabad, each following their own road toward understanding. The Silk Road was never one road. It was 1,000, crossing, dividing, rejoining, like the threads of a tapestry, too vast for any one weaver to see complete. It taught us that beauty emerges not from sameness, but from exchange, that no civilization, no idea, no person thrives alone. When a Roman wore silk, he carried the labor of Chinese weavers, Persian traders, and Indian dyers upon his shoulders. When a monk in Dunhuang copied a scroll, he passed on the thoughts of philosophers born far beyond his mountains. Every act of exchange was an act of remembrance, a quiet acknowledgement that we are, and have always been, connected. Even now, in this century of circuits and satellites, that truth endures. Every message sent, every voice shared, every connection made across distance is another footstep on the same eternal road. The desert may sleep, but the spirit of the traveler does not. And perhaps that is what the Silk Road truly was. Not a trade route, not a span of history, but a reflection of ourselves, a mirror held up to humanity's oldest desire, to reach out, to know, to belong. As the story draws to its end, the road itself seems to awaken beneath the stars. The dunes shimmer, not wheat-hit, but with memory. You can almost see the caravan fires rekindle their flames, small but steadfast. The shadows of merchants, monks, and wanderers move once more, their voices soft but clear. Do not let the road end with us. Their message is timeless. Every generation must walk the path anew, not with camels or cargo, but with curiosity and compassion. The Silk Road endures, wherever there is dialogue instead of distance, empathy instead of pride, exchange instead of isolation. For all its age, it remains young, reborn each time two strangers share an idea, a trade, or a dream. The narrator's voice slows now, as though wrapping the tale in silk itself. Remember, it whispers, the Silk Road was never just a road. It was, and is, a way of being. The wind sighs. The sands settled. The stars shimmer like lanterns above invisible caravans moving forever toward the dawn. And as you drift toward rest, the last words linger softly in your mind. The Silk Road was never a path upon the map. It was, and remains, a path within us. The endless road between curiosity and connection. And so, as the stars rise once more above the quiet sands, the old Silk Road fades back into memory. Not gone, only resting, waiting for those who still seek connection. Its legacy endures in every message, every trade, every act of understanding that bridges distance between hearts. The road never ended. Dear listener, it simply changed form. And perhaps, as you drift into sleep tonight, you too are walking at step by gentle step along the endless path between curiosity and peace. Thank you for traveling with us tonight. Please subscribe to Go to Sleep Historian for more journeys through the forgotten corners of our world. Until next time, may your mind rest easy, and may your dreams wander safely down the quiet roads of history.